afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today's lecture is with regard to the basal nuclei. If you can remember the previous lecture, we have discussed the reason why it is no longer called basal ganglia. In most of your textbooks, that is what you are going to see. But unless and until when the anatomist or the neuroanatomist try to revise or edit the medical books, that is when you will stop seeing basal ganglia in your anatomical textbooks. But currently speaking, most of the recent anatomists, including myself, we all recognize this word to be basal nuclei. I'm sure you are all aware about the difference between what is a nuclei and what is a ganglia. We have defined that in the previous lectures. So basal nuclei, why basal? You get it? Basal nuclei, they are a cortical kind of group of neurons that are located within the cerebral hemispheres. So if you remember your lectures very well, we said that there are two cerebral hemispheres, left and the right cerebral hemispheres. And in each of the cerebral hemisphere, we have these subcortical nuclei. Why is it called subcortical? Because they are below the cerebral cortex. You are aware that the cerebral hemisphere is coated with, the conglomeration of many cell bodies around the outer surface of each of the cerebral hemisphere. And that is what we call cerebral cortex. So because this group of nuclei, they are below the cortex, that is why basal nuclei are called subcortical group of nuclei. And they are also intracerebral because they are within each of the cerebral hemisphere. And then they are called basal nuclei because they are at the base of the brain. So that means they are a little bit far away from the cortex. So if this is the cortex here, so the basal nuclei are a little bit below towards the base of each of the cerebral hemisphere. And that is why they are called basal nuclei. We said they are subcortical, they are intracerebral, and then they are basal nuclei. And that is it. So now, what are the major functions of these basal nuclei? The most important among these is, what we have discussed in the previous lecture when we were discussing the thalamus. We discussed about the planning and initiation of motor movement, as well as stopping the motor movement, because if you are just moving around, of course, you cannot just move indefinitely. You have to stop. So the planning and the initiation as well as stopping of the movement, these are most of the major functions of the basal nuclei. Similarly, it also acts in the modulation of the intended movement. So by and large, what are the components of the basal nuclei? The components of the basal nuclei, in most of your textbooks, you will see some disparities. Just like what we also understand in our own religion, we have about 4 mazhabas in our own religion. Hanbali, Maliki, Shafi'i, and so on and so forth. Even in anatomy, the same thing. So we have so many, understanding about, the conglomerates of the basal nuclei themselves. So, but all the same, we have a lot of nuclei that, combine together to form the basal nuclei. We have what we call the putamen and the globus pallidus. So the globus pallidus and the putamen are just by the side of each of the thalamus that we have discussed before. So you have the thalamus on the medial side towards the midline. And then we have the putamen and the globus pallidus by the lateral side of each of the two thalami. And so the putamen as well as the globus pallidus, the two together, are called what we call lentiform nucleus. Lentiform nucleus. So we said that the putamen and the globus pallidus, the two together, are called lentiform nucleus. And similarly, the globus pallidus is also subdivided by a septum into two parts. That's what we call globus pallidus internus or interna. We also have globus pallidus externa. You get it? So, or externus. So we have these two divisions of the globus pallidus. So again, that's what we call corpus striatum. The corpus striatum is a combination of the caudate nucleus plus the lentiform nucleus. So from this, what I have written as an outline, you see that I've written that caudate nucleus is part of the basal nuclei. And so together with this putamen and the globus pallidus, plus the coded nucleus. That is what we call lentiform nucleus. Similarly, even including this one, there is also a disparity in your textbooks. You may find out that in other textbooks, they say only the putamen and the coded nucleus, that is the corpus striatum. So depending on which book you read, but all we know is that the lentiform nucleus plus the coded, the two together combine to form what we call corpus striatum. So the corpus striatum is a combination of, corpus striatum, is a combination of, lentiform nucleus and the coded nucleus. So you have this, So now we've seen some of the components of the basal nuclei. Similarly, that's what we call substantia nigra. Substantia nigra is, an area containing this gray matter at the topmost part of the midbrain. So it is at the topmost part of the midbrain, and this substantia nigra, it is, just below the thalamic nuclei on either side. So the substantia nigra is also considered to be part of the basal nuclei, and it is divided into two parts. That's what we call pars compacta, and there is what we also call pars reticulata. So we have pars compacta and pars reticulata. So out of these two layers of the substantia nigra, the pars compacta is the one that is related to the basal nuclei. Similarly, if you can remember, I also discussed with you the amygdaloid body, which is the tail end of the coded nucleus. So in some textbooks, the amygdaloid body is considered to be part of the coded nucleus, while in others, they said it's not a part of. All these are disparities with regard to the understanding of the anatomist, which is just normal for, for every cadre of, profession. So there's also colostrum, one, structure by the side of the external capsule, which is just lateral to the external capsule. And finally, we have the thalamus. Thalamus is also part or considered part of the basal nuclei, but not the entire thalamus. In the thalamus, if you can remember, toward the tail end of our lecture of the thalamus, I discussed the ventro-anterior nucleus as well as the ventrolateral nucleus of the thalamus. So the two together that are responsible for the planning and initiation of movement, where the motor information comes from the cortex, pass through the, part of the basal nuclei, and then finally goes into the thalamus. So those information from motor information for the initiation and planning of the movement, they pass through these two nuclei that we have just discussed before while we're discussing the thalamus. So these two nuclei are the two nuclei of importance with regard to the basal nuclei themselves. So what happens if there is a lesion of the basal nuclei? So honestly speaking, most of the diseases that do affect the basal nuclei, the most important, that we people are fully aware of is, what you call the Parkinson disease. So the Parkinson disease, when you go to the clinical side, you will see a lot of patients, because it's a very common kind of presentation in the clinical side. So you see a lot of people having this, Parkinson disease, whereby you have a problem with, planning and initiation of motor movement. If you ask the person to move, it is difficult for that person to move. If he starts moving, finally, there will be, difficulty in stopping the movement. Or when you ask the person to show you, his nose or point his nose or whatever, he will find difficulty in showing the nose and what have you. So there are so many presentations with these Parkinson patients, and then there's also what we call tremor. You will see their own limbs, when you ask them to take a plate of rice, for example, that's what we call intention tremor. You will see that the hands, they tend to tremor excessively like that. And there's what we call dyskinesia, difficulty in making the movement, and also that's what we call hypertonia. The tones of the muscles, are completely high. So these are part of the presentation with regard to the lesion associated with basal nuclei. So how do these connections, affect, for the initiation, for the planning and initiation of movement, and if also the stoppage of the movement. How does this happen? So we need to know, what happens to the cerebral cortex when we plan to make a movement. Currently now, as you are seeing me standing, I don't intend to make any movement for now. But now in my mind, I intend to move forward. So I start moving. You get my point? So I had the plan in my mind that I want to move forward. And then I move forward. And then suddenly I stop. You get my point? So these are the processes of what is going on here. And at times, there are some things that you do involuntarily while you are making movement. For example, now you are just walking around. You don't even know the time when you will be swinging your limbs, both the left and the right. You don't know. And all these are part of the control of these pathways that we are going to discuss. So involuntary or reflex movement of your limbs while walking, or while speaking, you make certain gestures that are, not under your control. You don't even know when you do them. So these are part of the, control, by this hypothalamus, the basal nuclei. And similarly, coordination of the movement is also part of the function of this basal nuclei. So now, as we already said that the planning and initiation of motor movement, comes from the cerebral cortex. In the cerebral cortex, we are all aware that we have what we call the premotor cortex, premotor area of cortex plus the primary motor area. Are you clear? So once you plan to make any movement, that planning begins with the premotor area. So the information to plan and initiate a motor movement, the neurons from the cerebral cortex, they pass down directly into the head of the caudate nucleus. And some of the fibers, they pass into the putamen. So from there, the second order neuron take such information, until they reach finally into the globus pallidus interna. Are you clear? From the globus pallidus interna, there is third order neuron that passes from the globus pallidus interna up into these two nuclei that I've just made mention, the ventrolateral nucleus and the ventro-anterior nucleus of the thalamus. After synapsin, that information also passes through the fourth order neuron back into the cerebral cortex, where it ends into the motor or primary motor area. By so doing, it must have been the intended planned motor movement is already been modified on how it is going to be performed by the basal nuclei, and then finally it is now taken back through the thalamus into the motor area for the initiation of the movement. So the planning comes from the premotor, pass through the basal nuclei, and then from the basal nuclei down into the thalamus. So all this information is being modified. The planning is modified on what you are supposed to do for you to initiate the movement. And then finally, from the thalamus, the information now goes to the motor area for you to begin the movement. Are you clear? Good. So now, what happens to these neurons? That is exactly what we are going to discuss now, different from what we discussed in the thalamus. You see, the fibers that come from the cerebral cortex into the head of the caudate nucleus as well as the putamen, these neurons, they are excitatory in nature. Excitatory in the sense that they release what you call glutamate. This glutamate, we said, is excitatory in nature. So now, as soon as this neuron now comes into, the head of the caudate and the putamen, it synapses with another neuron. This neuron is different from this neuron coming from the cerebral cortex into the head of the caudate as well as the putamen, in that this neuron releases what we call GABA. So this second order neuron releases what we call GABA, what we call gamma aminobutyric acid. Gamma what? Gamma aminobutyric acid. So this gamma aminobutyric acid, this neurotransmitter here inhibits. Once this neuron is stimulated, it now releases GABA. And you know that GABA is inhibitory in nature. So now what is going on here, if you have excitatory neurons coming from the cerebral cortex, they now synapse with the inhibitory neurons. So that by the time these neurons that are excitatory they come here and excite this neuron, what will happen? There will be more production of GABA neurotransmitter by this neuron. Are you clear? Because this neuron excites this neuron. So that once this neuron is being excited, it's going to produce more of GABA at this synaptic junction. Are you clear? So you have a lot of GABA here produced. So you have more GABA here. Are you clear? So this neuron, if it is excited, is going to produce more GABA. The third order neuron is also GABAergic. Are you clear? So this neuron also is inhibitory in nature. So understand this point very much clear. If this third order neuron, are you clear, is stimulated, it is going to produce more of GABA. Clear? But when it is inhibited, what will happen? It will produce no more GABA. Are you clear? So now, because this second order neuron is stimulatory to this third order neuron, so that means this neuron will stimulate this to produce more GABA. Are you clear? So if this one now, this is inhibitory here, you know, so it is now going to inhibit. Are you clear? This one I said, understand it very clear. Maybe I'm confusing, maybe you are confused. This neuron here, understand very well. The second order neuron is producing a lot of GABA here. That means it is going to inhibit this third order neuron the more. Are you clear? You remember what I said initially? Supposing that, forget about this second order neuron to be GABAergic for now. Supposing that this also, you know, is containing, it releases glutamate, you know, neurotransmitter here. So if it is glutamate produced here, what will happen to this neuron? It's going to be stimulated to produce more. But now this second order neuron produces more GABA. Are you clear? So it is now going to depress this third order neuron the more. Are you clear? If you don't understand very well, actually, you're going to get confused. So that means this neuron is now going to be depressed the more. It's just like if, let me give you a typical example for you to understand very well. It is just somebody who has committed a crime. If you commit a crime, and me as your elder brother, I just come to you, and I start beating you, but yet you are standing, you didn't fall down. Then the second person who is stronger than myself come and start beating you, you will fall down. Are you glad? Because the beating is too much. You get my point? So you are just going to be inhibited to the extent that you cannot even run away. That is exactly what is going on here. So this second order neuron produces more of GABA so that it is going to inhibit this third order neuron from producing more GABA. So that if this third order neuron is inhibited, that means nobody is going to stop this one from firing up. I don't know that you understand. So this third order neuron is just helpless. So this is glutaminergic. So it is excitatory. Are you clear? So that means this is going, so this one will do whatever it wants to do. So it is excitatory. It will go and excite the motor cortex so that you initiate the motor movement. You get my point? And so as we are saying, this increase, once this one now is stimulated, the motor cortex is excited. So it will now, the information will now pass through the pyramidal tracts and go to the muscles of the intended motion. If you intend to move your upper limbs, so from the motor cortex, the information to begin the movement will now come to the upper limbs. Then you now move like the way I'm moving them now. If I intend to walk around, so that intended, movement, from once this neuron excites that area where I intend to move, then I start moving. Are you clear? Good. But actually, the actual movement, actual intended movement, is not somehow the way you like it. You get it? If not because of the another pathway that I'm going to discuss now. So this pathway is what we call direct pathway. So now we know that direct pathway is an excitatory pathway for the intended movement. So the second pathway, what we call the indirect pathway, as the information to plan movement comes from the premotor cortex. It just passes exactly the way it passed in the direct pathway. Goes to the caudate nucleus, goes to the putamen, and from the putamen now, the second order neuron takes, second order neuron now begins from the globus pallidus externa this time around. See the difference? The other one for the direct pathway, the second order neuron synapse, so the third order neuron synapses in the globus pallidus interna. Are you clear? What with regard to the indirect pathway, the third order neuron synapses in the globus pallidus externa. But this time around, the third order neuron is not coming from, it's not going to the thalamus directly, but rather this one synapses with the neuron coming from the subthalamus. Are you clear? So you have the third order neuron, which is also, inhibitory. We'll discuss that later. From the subthalamic nucleus, the fourth order neuron now goes up into the globus pallidus interna, and from that, the fifth order neuron takes origin to go and synapse with the ventrolateral and ventro-anterior nuclei, and from that, the sixth order neuron, takes up into the motor cortex. Are you clear? So now let us see what is going on with regard to what we have explained here. So as I said initially, as we know that this intention of planning a motor movement comes from the premotor cortex. These neurons that come from there, I said before, they are what? They are excitatory. So they release that glutamate that we have made mention before. So since they are excitatory, when they reach this caudate, and they also reach the putamen, they are going to excite this second order neuron. So when these second order neurons are excited, this second order neuron, similar to this, they are GABAergic. So that means when they are stimulated, they are going to produce more of GABA. You get my point? And if they produce more of GABA, they are going to inhibit this third order neuron the more. Are you clear? So that this third order neuron, when it is inhibited more by more production of GABA here, so this fourth order neuron is going to be on its own. So it will fire no stoppage, non-stop. To just keep on because nobody is inhibiting it. Are you clear? So this fourth order neuron from the subthalamic nucleus will fire very well to go and stimulate this fifth order neuron. Are you clear? So once this fifth order neuron is being stimulated, it's going to produce more GABA here. Are you clear? So more GABA is going to be produced in the thalamus for this ventrolateral and ventro-anterior. So once more GABA is being produced here, what will happen to this stimulatory effect? It will inhibit it. So that means stoppage of movement is the second pathway Just like I have given you an example, when you are just driving inside your car, you accelerate and then you start moving. You get my point? Initially, you have to key in your car. That is planning to move. You key in your car, it's just like the information coming from the premotor cortex. Then as soon as the car starts, that is the beginning. Then you match your leg on the accelerator. You start moving. So that is the beginning of the movement. Are you clear? And so when you start moving, probably maybe if you match very well, if you match very well, probably you may extend, the site where you want to go. And so for that movement to be so precise, so smooth, there has to be a brake that you can match to decelerate you, for you to be able to stop at exact point where you intend to stop. Are you clear? That is the function of this indirect pathway. So much so that by the time this fifth order neuron now inhibits this one, so the motor cortex is the excitation that happened before here for the movement to continue. This one will now try to reduce the amount of movement before finally stop the movement. Are you clear? So we have now seen the function of both direct and indirect pathway. So what happens with the connection between this direct and indirect pathway? So what is going on here is that, I don't know, maybe we have a break so that you can ask questions if you are not clear before I now continue with the issue of the substantia nigra and what have you. Oh, can we continue? Yes. Okay, fine. So now the connection between the substantia nigra and the remaining part of the basal nuclei is like you have neurons coming here to synapse. You also have another neuron from the substantia nigra going to synapse with those neurons that synapse in the cortex nucleus and also in the putamen. Are you clear? So with regard to this pars compacta of the substantia nigra, what this pars compacta releases is what we call dopamine. And I'm sure you are aware of the function of this dopamine. This dopamine has what we call D1 and D2 receptors. Are you clear? For the direct pathway, this dopamine acts on the D1 receptors, and for the indirect pathway, the dopamine acts on the D2 receptors. Are you clear? So what is happening is that, look at this. Once this dopamine is being released by these neurons going from the pars compacta to the putamen and the cortex nucleus, it is going to release dopamine here. And the dopamine that is being released here now is excitatory in nature. The D1 receptors, once they receive this dopamine, they excite this, they excite this second order neuron the more. Are you clear? So once these are excited, it is going to increase the production of more GABA here. Are you clear? So what happened to the increase in the production of GABA? Is it the same as before the joining of this pars compacta, or the same as after joining? I don't know that you understand the point. Before this pars compacta joins in this synapse here, as I told you before, this fibers coming from the cerebral cortex, they are excitatory to the second order neuron. But now, another neuron from the pars compacta that releases dopamine also add to the excitation of the glutaminergic fibers coming from the direct pathway. Are you clear? So the excitation is now more. So the production of GABA here, is it going to be the same as before or higher? Higher, exactly. So this one is going to be inhibited the more. Are you clear? So since it's going to be, it's going to be stimulated the more, so it is going to produce more GABA. Are you clear? The GABA is higher now. So since the GABA is much, much higher now, it means a lot of GABA is deposited here. It means this neuron, this third order neuron, is going to be inhibited the more or less, the more different from the initial before joining. Are you clear? So since it's now been inhibited the more, what happened? This one will do whatever it was to do. Nobody, no mother, no father that is going to, just like orphan. Mother has died, the one that will support him, and now the father is dead again. So the freedom is much now, because no father, no mother to support that person to stop him from doing anything. The same thing here, because now before it was just like a mother, now father has come. You get my point? So now this one will now is now going to the cerebral cortex to excite the motor area the more. And so there is going to be an increased motor activity more than before the joining of these fibers from the substantia nigra. Are you clear? Okay? So what happens to the indirect pathway? Still, the indirect pathway, this connection from the substantia nigra goes here in the putamen, synapse there, and also goes to the head of the cortex to also synapse there. But here, since these fibers from the substantia nigra, as they go there, the synapse with D2 dopaminergic receptors. But here, this connection is inhibitory, unlike the other one there. Are you clear? So now, look at it from the law of physics. You have positive and negative, what happens? If this one initially was stimulating, now this one comes, is inhibiting. It's just like a boy in his parents' house. The mother said, Kai, just leave this place. And the dad comes and said, don't leave. What happens? Are you clear about what I'm saying? The father has cancelled what, because the father is stronger, right? I'm sure you are going to follow what your dad has said. Otherwise, he will beat you to hell. I don't know that you understand my point. The mother, because she loves you, she may not beat you. You get my point? But the dad said, don't go, don't move. You have to stay. Are you clear? So the father has cancelled the effect of the mother. And then everything stands still. Are you clear? So here, since the excitatory nature of the glutaminergic fibers coming from the premotor area is no longer there, but the effect of these dopaminergic fibers coming from the substantia nigra. So this second order neuron, they will do whatever they want. So they will now produce their own GABA. Naturally, they produce their own GABA. If you stimulate them, they produce more GABA. If you inhibit them, they produce less GABA. But now nobody to prevent them from increasing or decreasing. So they now produce their own GABA as their own face. Just like you, no father, no mother. So you do what you like at your own will. Are you clear? So these ones, they produce GABA. And so since the GABA is produced here, it's going to inhibit this GABAergic, neuron. As it releases GABA, is going to inhibit this third order neuron from, producing more GABA. Are you clear? So since there is less GABA here, what happens to this one? It's now going to fire up. Are you clear? So as this one fires up, it is going to stimulate this fifth order neuron. Are you clear? So once this one is stimulated to produce more GABA, so since more GABA is being produced, so this one is going to inhibit. That means it's similar to the actual indirect pathway. So there will be stoppage of movement now. If initially, when you decelerate, when you now brake, you put a brake on your leg, or on the accelerator. If you want to decelerate, you put your leg on the brake. You start marching slowly, right? That is the effect of the indirect pathway. When you march finally and you stop, that is this final stop. Are you clear? So because of this more inhibition to the indirect pathway. Inhibition initially from the indirect pathway, and then more inhibition from the connection of the substantia nigra with the indirect part. So you have a final stoppage because the stop now, the pressure to stop is higher now. Are you clear? So that is exactly what is going on with regard to this direct and indirect pathway for this basal nuclei.